Hello everyone and welcome to the finals of the 2019 FIDE World Cup. It's game 3, Radjabov versus Ding Liren, and in the previous round Ding won a very nice game with the white pieces, a brilliancy if you will, and this is Radjabov's best chance to get back into the match. He now has the white pieces and well, if he doesn't use his chance now, tomorrow he gets black again and it's very unlikely that he will be able to get back into the match. So it will be very interesting to see what he prepared for Ding, as in game 1 he prepared a very nice idea against the martial attack, but it very soon unwinded into a draw. So without further ado, let's check out the game. With the white pieces, Radjabov opens with e4. With e5, knight to f3, knight to c6, bishop to b5, same as in game 1 with a6, Morphy's defense to the Ruy Lopez, bishop to a4, and knight to f6. So far, repeating game 1. With castles by Radjabov, bishop to e7, rook to e1, so everything the same, setting up for the marshal. b5, bishop to b3, and Ding castles. And here c3, again Radjabov invites Ding to go for the martial attack, and Ding does, as he didn't really have any problems in game 1. And since he's leading by a point in the match, he doesn't mind drawing this game as well. With e captures on d5, knight captures on d5, knight captures, and now rook captures on e5. So everything the same as in game 1, c6, defending the knight, and now d3. With bishop to d6, rook to e1, and now bishop to f5. So still everything the same as in game 1. Queen to f3, going after the bishop. On f5, queen to h4, now threatening queen captures on h2. Of course, we already explained in game 1 why this doesn't work. G3, attacking the queen, queen to h3, and now in game 1 we had knight to d2, and we said that Ding already had this position on the board that he played it against Karjakin, where bishop to e3 was played, and here Radjabov goes for this idea, bishop to e3. So here we have a deviation from game 1. And okay, he offers the d3 pawn with bishop captures on d3, and now knight to d2, gaining rapid development. With queen to f5 now, offering a queen trade, and now bishop to d4 by Radjabov, just putting the bishop to a much nicer diagonal, opening up the e-file for the rook, with rook f to d8 by Ding, and now comes a4. So this has all been played before, nothing new, with h6 by Ding, and now comes h4. And rook a to c8. So all the pieces are pretty much developed. And here there is one game, the one we were mentioning, Karjakin already played against Ding Liren in the Sinquefield Cup, and the Ding had this position against Wesley So as well in the Candidates 2018. Both games were drawn, and both games continued with a captures on b5. But here we have a new move by Radjabov. He prepared queen captures queen on f5, so it is as of move 21 that we have a completely new game. So what is this poison that Radjabov brought to this game with queen captures on f5 that should complicate matters for Ding, as he really needs a win in this game? Well, of course, Ding recaptured with bishop captures, and now comes a knight to e4. And Ding here really started spending time on the clock. For his next move, he has to decide what to do. How does he defend the bishop? For example, does he go to e7? Does he go to f8? Does he go to b8? Maybe does he not defend it? Does he push c5? All of these ideas are seemingly nice, but you really have to make sure if you don't know the position. So here Ding took some half an hour. I think it was 29 minutes, but still a lot of time, and in the end he played bishop to f8, just to show if, for example, bishop to e8, white gets a very nice game with a5, and then you will have the c5 outpost for your knight. You're going to go for the a6 pawn, and black will have a very hard time defending it, so black will most likely have to give up the bishop pair, and here white just continues the game with the bishop pair in a slightly better position. On the other hand, c5 was also a possibility. I think after the game it was mentioned that c5 is a known drawing line by Radjabov, but it's hard to find such an idea over the board. You would go for something like knight captures on d6, rook captures on d6, and now bishop to e5, attacking the rook. Rook goes back, and now with c4, white would get to further complicate matters. But all in all, black should be able to survive everything. But okay, Ding went bishop back to f8, and now comes knight to c5. And here, after this knight to c5, Radjabov is going after the a6 pawn, and it's not all that clear what to do here. So here Ding had a nice sip of his water. If you don't believe it, I even have a photo of this. There you have it, Ding having a nice sip. And he decided to defend it with a nice tactic. He defends it with knight to b4. This is now possible. The a6 pawn is defended, and if you capture the knight here, you get a rook captures on d4. You lose the bishop on d4, and now after knight captures on a6, you get a rook to a8. Captures on b5, captures on b5, and now you get this position where even though white is up a pawn, doesn't really do you all that much. The knight is pretty much stuck there. If you move it, then of course black will be able to recapture the b4 pawn without a problem, probably pick up the b2 pawn as well at some point. So after knight to b4, we have rook to e5 by Radjabov. Again, improving the position of his pieces and attacking the bishop on f5. So now Ding has to decide, does he go back bishop to g6? Does he go back bishop to h7? Does he defend the bishop with the g6? It's hard to decide. All moves have their merits, but for example, if you play something like bishop to h7, you immediately get a captures on b5, captures, and rook to a7. Really with a very active game from white. So instead, Ding decides to keep the bishop on f5. He plays g6. And okay, we have a captures on b5, and now Ding doesn't play a captures and allows rook to a7, but instead goes c captures on b5, offering offering the a6 pawn. But Radjabov played an even trickier move. Not knight captures on a6, but instead knight to e6. And here again, Ding started calculating, and this time he took a really big sip of his water. We also have a nice photo of that. There you have it, Ding with the nice sip of water. And, well, what's the idea behind knight to e6? Obviously, the question is, can you capture it? If you play f captures on e6, then white has a very clean advantage after a certain move. But feel free to pause the video while I give you a couple of seconds and find what Radjabov's idea is in this position. If you were able to do it, congratulations, as it's a really difficult line to spot. And for those of you who just want to enjoy the show, it's rook captures on f5. The pawn is pinned here, you cannot capture with this pawn, so you have to play g captures on f5, and now you get bishop captures on e6 with check. Checking the king, you're gonna pick up the rook, king h7, and now you pick it up. And now you have to decide, do you capture on c8 and allow c captures on b4, or do you go knight to c2, which is terrible. Even though it comes with an in-between move, an attack on the rook on a1, now you get bishop captures on f5 check, just picking up that knight. So after the king moves, for example, here, you would be, for example, up a whole piece. So a lot of complications here after knight to e6, but the Ding calculates well, and of course he captures it with the bishop. Now we have rook captures on e6 by Radjabov, f captures on e6, and the bishop captures on e6 with check, and now king to h7. So now it's a bit different, as the knight will be able to use that, Zwischenzug with knight to c2, as you will not have the f5 square to pick up the knight, since the g6 pawn is still there. But we have bishop captures on c8, rook captures on c8. Ding took almost 20 minutes to decide whether he wants to go rook captures on c8 or to go for this in-between move knight to c2. Knight to c2 is definitely a possibility, as now we already mentioned that the g6 pawn blocks bishop to f5. For example, rook c1, knight captures bishop, but now after pawn recaptures, the bishop on c8 is protected. So here the game continues, white is up a pawn, and it's, well, if rook captures, then you start picking up the queenside pawns. It doesn't look nice, but it was a possibility. Instead, Ding went for rook captures on c8, and now we have c captures on b4. So Ding prefers this to that, as here white has a double b pawn, and he immediately goes for them with rook to c4. And this is the first time Radjabov started spending time on his clock, as he didn't calculate this rook captures on c8 line at all. He was mostly prepared for knight to c2, the line that we've just shown. So here he spent some 15 minutes on his next move, and he has to decide. If you go bishop to c3, doesn't really do anything. Black will just capture it. For example, if rook captures on a6, you're gonna get bishop captures on c3, captures, and then now of course you'll play rook to b6, go after the passed pawn, rook b3 defending, and it's a clean draw. On the other hand, if you go something like bishop to e5, then bishop to g7 is pretty much a clean draw, because now after the bishop moves, yes, you're gonna defend your b4 pawn. Rook c6 attacks the bishop and defends the a6 pawn. So here Radjabov found a better move than bishop to c3 or bishop to e5. He played bishop to f6, which is now different. Now if you try the same idea of bishop to g7, for example, which was played in the game, you will get bishop to e7, and now there is no rook c6. There is rook c6, Ding did play it, but now it doesn't come with an attack on the bishop here, as the bishop from f6 came to e7 instead here, so it will not be a target for the rook, so it is an improvement. We have rook to a2 by Radjabov. Seems like an odd place to put a rook, very passive, but his plan is he wants to play b3. The b2 pawn is a target on b2 anyway, so he just wants to put it on a light square, and after this he can start bringing his rook into the game. We have king to g8. Ding starts improving the position of his king, and then now bishop back to c5. Just closing the c file for Ding's rook. King to f7, and now king to g2, and here king to e6 by Ding. There was also the option of playing bishop to f8. It seems like a reasonable idea. It's a very strong bishop, cutting your rook from entering the game, but the problem is white just continues, king f3, and after you, even if you trade it, captures, you're not really going to capture here. I mean, if you don't, b4 is coming, white will cement his advantage there, and if you capture it, then you get rook captures on a6, and if rook to c2, then white had h5 now, which pretty much cleans up the king side. G captures, rook captures on h6, rook captures on b2, and then now rook captures on h5. It's 2-1 in a rook endgame, but those are two connected pass pawns, so white would definitely have the edge here. So after rook to king to g2, Ding further improves the position of his king. King e6. He wants to get to f5, maybe even e4 if possible, and now b3. The b2 pawn is no longer a target, and the Radjabov is ready to bring his rook into the game. Also, the situation on the clock. This is move 36. 4 more moves until time control. It's 58 minutes for Radjabov and only 16 minutes for Ding. With h5 by Ding, and now king to f3. King to f5, not allowing Radjabov's king to further go into the position, and now comes rook to d2. And now it seems like Ding has some very active counterplay with a5, but it's only an illusion. For example, if you go a5, yes, you cannot capture because rook captures on c5, but Radjabov would have rook to d5 check here. And now if king e6, just rook g5, and it's going to be very hard to prevent rook captures on g6. You could lose the rook on c6. If you move the king, for example, king d7, just b captures on f5. Now that the rook is on the 5th rank, the bishop is protected, you're just going to play b4 and have a protected pass pawn. It's going to be game over for Ding. So instead, Ding finds a bishop to e5. It is the strongest move in the position, and it prevents the rook from reaching the g5 square. Of course, Radjabov plays rook to d5. He further improves his position, and he now forces Ding to make any move, but not any move. It doesn't really work for Ding. You can't really play nothing if you move, for example, something weird like bishop to c8. You're going to get bishop to d4, just attacking the pinned piece. So Ding has to move the king, and here Ding plays king to e6, which is not the most precise move, as it allows king to e4 right away. A more resilient idea from Ding would have been, instead of king to e6, king to f6. It just says, okay, if you come to e4, I'm just going to play rook to e6 and force your king back. For example, if you play king back to f3, I'm just going to repeat rook back to c6, and you have to come up with something else. So this was definitely a more resilient idea than straight up king to e6. But okay. Ding is low on the clock, and this is move 39. He has to make one more move until time control. With king to e4 by Radjabov, and now Ding goes, as the bishop is under attack, he goes bishop to f6. So now this is move 40. The time control has been reached, and the players have received an additional half an hour on their clocks. So what do you play here? f4. Of course, Radjabov's idea is f5. He wants to trade the f pawn for the g pawn, and then capture the h5 pawn with the rook. And Ding has to make a move. Here, Ding plays bishop to c3. It's a waiting move just to see what Radjabov will play. And as I already mentioned, what Radjabov's idea was, bishop to c3 didn't really do anything to prevent this. So f5 with check. And now if you capture it, just rook captures next move, Radjabov will recapture the h5 pawn. Is going to be up to two connected pass pawns on the king side. It will be game over for Ding. So Ding cannot allow to trade here. We have king to f7, and now comes rook to d7 check. Much better than just capturing here. If you capture, then Ding will recapture, and now if of course you can capture on h5, but Ding can capture on g3, so not something you want to do. So instead, f5 check, Ding goes back, king to f7, and now rook d7 check. So what do you do here? Ding plays king to g8. King to e8 also possible, but Ding goes king to g8, and he allows a very nice move from Radjabov. It is really a beautiful winning move, so feel free to pause the video and try to find the move that Radjabov played in this position while I give you a couple of seconds. So for those of you who were able to do it, you are a brilliant endgame player. And for those of you who just want to enjoy the show, it's bishop to d6. Cut off the rook's defense to the pawn here and force Ding to capture and allow your king to go after the h5 pawn. And now Ding's rook really isn't doing all that much, doesn't really have a good square. So Ding captured on f5 with king captures on f5, and now Ding played bishop to g7. He tried one last trick. For example, if Radjabov would attack the dh pawn with king to g6, then of course Ding would have bishop to f8, just going after the piece here, so he would win a piece, most likely win the game then. But Radjabov, of course, is not interested in such trickery. He plays king to g5, and it was in this position on move 46 that Ding Liren resigned the game. And incredible as it is, but Radjabov manages to get back into the match. I'm not saying incredible as it is because Ding is such a huge favorite, but it's just that Ding is leading the match and he only needs the draw. And to win on demand against Ding Liren, who really doesn't lose games in classical time format almost at all, it's really just a really impressive feat. And Radjabov mentioned in an interview after the game that he actually had something similar prepared for Ding in round one, but he then decided not to play it, so that's why he decided to go for that quick draw against the martial attack. But here he really outplays Ding, and it's very hard to pinpoint where Ding went wrong. There were a lot of situations where Ding could have improved his game, but those were like very little improvements that basically only the engine sees. And this is what it takes to beat Ding in a classical game. So Radjabov came extremely prepared. You know, at one point I believe Radjabov had like a 1 hour lead on the clock, or maybe 45 minutes. I wasn't really checking, but it was a huge lead. Radjabov made all of his moves pretty much instantly. It was only at that point that I mentioned that Radjabov actually started spending time. So yeah, definitely a brilliant game by Radjabov, taking down Ding Liren in a classical game. Really impressive. Tomorrow is game 4 of the classical time format. Ding again with the white pieces. Will he be able to finish off this match in the classical section, or will we go to Rapids, Blitz, and maybe even Armageddon? Definitely going to be interesting, so hope you're ready for that. But yeah, that's pretty much the game. I do hope you enjoyed it. I would like to thank Pablo Mohan for a contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot. I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. Thank you for watching, and I will see you soon, continuing this coverage of the amazing World Cup that we're enjoying, checking up on your wonderful suggestions and so on. So thank you all. I will see you soon, and have an excellent rest of your day.